So good evening, and I'm David Ingram, and around the world, and tonight we're talking to Richard Pitt, and we're talking to Gary Gauvin. And Gary is down in Texas, in Dallas, Texas, and we're going to phone him in about 2 seconds. Because Gary, if you ever take a look at Google and you type income tax experts into Google, Gary and I just keep on switching around between number 1 and 2, which is sort of fun if you put it right down to it. We're doing something else tonight. We're broadcasting with Ustream. For the first time we've done this, and Mitchell has been trying to get us to do it for quite a while, and Richard finally took a look at it and said, yeah, this works. And we've talked to Harvey Cohen as well, and he does his program, Sales Journal, whatever it is, on Ustream. And you're going to start co-hosting this with me, which means that if I don't want to be here some night, I can go away and you can keep the program, so we won't do what I usually do.
That's right.
Which is if I was too busy, I just didn't bother doing it that
Or
night.
me play reruns or something like that. And actually with this, it makes it very easy for me to put reruns on too.
Yes. So we can have fun. So give Gary a call. Mitchell, let's get Gary on the line because I want to talk to him. He's camera shy, doesn't want to come in. With Ustream, it's sort of neat because we can open it up to somebody who clicks on the join as co-host, and then you come up with your little picture in the screen. And as long as you got a webcam, we can look directly at your face while you ask the questions. We can do back and forth.
We can do it exactly like that.
A little bit of a time lag, but this is getting into space age stuff. So it's really good. And we're having fun. And I hear that Mitchell's got Gary on the line. In about another second, we'll get Gary.
You have to transfer him while you're talking to him.
Can you hear us, Gary?
And punch it up on the board.
Have we got it?
Hello.
Hi, Gary.
How are you?
I am in good shape, and it's so much fun to talk to you. And I got to tell the audience that Gary and I were partners in Ottawa, in an Ottawa office at 310 O'Connor and then 329 Waverly. And Gary then moved down to Dallas, Texas, and is a primo, #1 major U.S.-Canada tax consultant. And he sent me something today which prompted this, because Gary, how many conversations have we had about whether a TN visa holder can be paid as a 1099?
Well, we've been flogging that to death for the last 10 years, 3, 4, 5 times a year. One of us has a client that's got one opinion that differs from what you and I have come to believe.
Well, I have to admit that I have had not too much problems with actually doing the tax returns as a 1099 because there has been no back and forth stuff between the IRS and Homeland Security. So nobody's checking up on how these TN visa holders are paid. But you sent me something today because you're writing an article or writing a tax immigration thing for a major journal. Which one is it?
Yeah, it's the LexisNexis publication. It's sort of a mini-series out of their 12-volume master mega-sized immigration manual. This one's called Immigration Law and Procedure, Desk Edition. And I know the editor, Dan, down in Austin, Dan Kowalski, and I'm writing for an editor in New York City.
Oh, wait a minute now. You're talking about Dan Kowalski, the immigration lawyer?
Yeah.
I don't believe it.
Yeah, he's an editor of the revision editor.
Well, he's from
and a couple other monthly publications that they've asked me to write some sort of short.
Punch up the audio from the phone. Push it up as high as it'll go.
Just for the record, and I've never met Dan Kowalski in person, but are you going to be talking to him soon?
I'm usually talking to my editor probably within the month. I will be. Okay,
well, Dan Kowalski was the immigration lawyer for one of my clients, and they were in this is one of my favorite stories. I know I phoned to talk to you about something, but since you mentioned somebody, he was from Texas, and he went up and was practicing law in Seattle, and Madam Justice Ho was the immigration judge, and Dan Kowalski was representing his client, my client, And the judge on 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon suddenly asked, well, why, has Mr. So-and-so, has he been doing his U.S. tax returns? And they produced the U.S. tax returns that I'd been doing. This is a fellow that was working in Canada and living in Point Roberts. And she said, well, let's phone Mr. Ingram and find out. So at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, my office in the Capilano Mall, the phone rings, and my receptionist says, this is really interesting because he passes the call through to me, and I answer, and it's Madam Justice Ho from Washington State Immigration Court, and she explains what she was the one who was on the line. She explained what she wanted, and she said, well, I've got to put you under oath, Mr. Ingram. And I said, oh. And she said, do you have a Bible? And I said, well, I would likely not take the oath under a Bible anyway, for what it's worth. And she says, oh, well, that's fine then. You can just attest. And she says, stand up. And I stood up in my office, which had windows opening into the mall. So I'm standing there with my hand in the air, taking an oath of, to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, over the phone in immigration court. And apparently Dan turned to my client and said, does he know this is happening? And my client said, no. And it came out of the blue, and they asked me the question about this fellow and why was I doing U.S. tax returns for him. I said, because he lives in the U.S. and he's got a green card, and he has to do U.S. tax returns on his world income, even though all his income comes from Canada. And she said, well, and I said, well, I tell you the truth, I've never been to his house or to his office in Point Roberts, but he always comes in. He has some old cars as well and an old truck, and he shows up all the time, and the cars all have U.S. license plates on it, and I put his U.S. address on them. Anyway, they gave him a citizenship, et cetera, and it was really funny. Anyway, you've got to talk to Dan about it sometime and get his side of the story, because I've never talked to him since. Anyway, back to the TN visa holders. Yeah. What you have said here very clearly, and would you have any objection to this going out on my newsletter?
No, not at all.
Okay. What you've said very clearly is that at least since 2005, a TN visa holder has to be paid as an employee with taxes deducted, etc. Is that clear? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I'm saying their clarification would have been retroactive, but it was absolutely stated many, many times in a vague manner. And by 2005, this is Immigration Office, as opposed to IRS, absolutely made it clear, which is very difficult for them to do sometimes.
Yes.
That you cannot be self-employed, you must be an employee, and you cannot be an employee of your Canadian wholly owned corporation.
And that's what all sorts of guys want to do. They go down, they get a TN visa, and then the company that's hired them pays a corporation in Canada.
Yeah.
Which
absolutely.
Makes no sense.
And then they try and claim a treaty-based position that maybe that corporation doesn't have a permanent establishment here, not subject to tax. So my position would be that's still wages to the individual, constructive wages, irregardless of the fact that it was paid to a corporation.
And not only that, he owes U.S. Social Security and everything on it because he was performing the work in the States.
Well, the big problem will be with the employer that hired him and paid that for him corporation. When the state comes in to audit, most of the self-employed versus employee issues arise at a state audit level.
That's
IRS
correct.
doesn't usually make that determination because they get their Social Security either way, self-employed or not. It's the states that are not getting their unemployment insurance.
Ah.
So they will assess as an employee, and they will advise IRS that they found this irregularity or problem, that the person should be an employee, categorized as an employee as opposed to self-employed. And that's how IRS normally ends up with it on their desk and makes that determination.
Well, so that anybody who's turning in now knows, what we have is Gary Gauvin on the line. Gary is down, is it Garland or Rockwall, Texas you're in?
I'm in Rockwall. It's just another one of those suburbs of Dallas.
Dallas, so essentially you're in Dallas, Texas.
Yeah.
And he is, as far as I'm concerned, between he and I'm likely better because I'm still in Canada and more tuned to Canada stuff.
And much older than I am.
And much older than you are, that's right. But much good, better looking, too. So it must be because you wouldn't let us put your picture on here, right? Anyway, I'm just having fun. If there's anything you want to ask there, too, Richard, jump in because you've known Gary for all this time, of Gary all this time.
How are you doing there, Gary?
I'm good.
Yeah,
Are you
Richard-
watching us online, or are you just sitting there on the phone?
I am actually e-filing a 1040 as we speak. I'm a busy boy at this time of year.
So you're working hard. He didn't want to go on. I had to break his arm.